look now at selectors. So this is a selector that allows us to select an element. So this will select the body element in our HTML. So that's really everything here. Let's go back and look at selecting, for instance, the H1. So H1 will affect all H1s, and we can, again, we're just setting properties. This is the only property we've really looked at right now, is setting this background color. But let's try, for instance, light yellow. Notice, by the way, our property, we really have the property name, the value, and then a semicolon. So we could also do, for instance, the UL. We could do the individual list items. Let's switch it from beige to brown. Yeah. Okay, so that's one way. The problem with this way is that it selects all of the elements of that type. So if you, for instance, got a list item that you want to change, if you're changing the list items in a particular list, this will change it in all the lists. So it'd be nice to have some way of being more specific. And that next way is looking at the class. So what we can actually do for a given element is set up a class. We can say, for instance, this is, let's say, the overview. It's lowercase here. This is this can be, let's say, of class 1. And maybe we have a couple of those. And then we have one of type class 2. So this is and the first list is going to be something like this. So we've got 3 lists. And this has changed all the lists. Let's get rid of this brown because it's a little ugly. And so what happened with our up and down, if we go back, something's the matter here. I'm just not seeing what it is. Oh, the problem is here. We're missing a closing quote, double quote. All right, so we're using the attributes of these elements, and the attribute that we're interested in is the class. So let's say we want to just change class 1. So that would be both of these unordered lists, the first 2 unordered lists. So what we can do now is we use a dot, and dot allows us to put a class name. And notice how WebStorm is actually just providing us a list of the classes that we have already defined in HTML. So let's just look at class 1, and we'll put in a background of antique white. Okay. If we want to change class 2, we can change class 2 independently. So we can make this light sea green, let's say. Okay. So the classes are normally used where you have, often it's multiple of a particular kind of element that you want to be styling. So it's more specific than just a general UL, okay? Because this is referencing the class, and the class is according to the rules, is more specific than just the element type. You can get even more specific than that and provide an ID. So an ID, for instance, might be used here. So we can say ID is the special item, let's just say. Okay. So if I go back over here, in order to reference an ID, you use a pound sign. And we'll make that one be blue-violet. Okay. So for an ID should always be unique within a given HTML page. So this ID, the intention of that is that there's no other ID of that type. If you want to have multiple elements that you're trying to refer to in a selector, you should be using a class instead of an ID. But if you've got a single one, you can provide the ID. And normally for these namings, you want to try and make sure the namings are not style specific. So you would not want to say here, this item is going to be the purple, purple list item, because that's specifying what it's going to look like, and you don't want to be controlling what it looks like. You want to be controlling what it is. So this might be, a special item, or maybe it's a happy item. Who knows? Okay, but it's something that needs some reference that we can then get to from here. So those are the three kinds of selectors, and the selectors range in specificity. So the least specific is the element type, like this. The next most specific is the class, and the most specific is the ID. And again, as we look at these are all specified in attributes of the elements in the HTML. And so the class is just an attribute whose name is class, and the ID is an attribute whose name is ID. Could you have something where we have both the class is equal class1 and the ID equals the, let's say this is the emotion list? Sure, that'd be fine. So if we go back over here, class1 is antique white, but we could be more specific than that and say that the emotion list has a background that